As the Kenyan elections approach in a couple weeks, I think it's useful to take stock of what we know about elections in Kenya. The last election in 2013 was not contentious, unlike the 2007 election, which erupted in a bunch of violence. But it also had issues with the implementation of the election. And so I'd like to talk a bit about what we learned as we studied the 2013 election and what that implies for the election that's just around the corner. So in 2013, along with collaborators Vincent Pons and Ben Marks, we ran a very large experiment in Kenya in collaboration with the Electoral Commission to try and get out the vote in a very standard US election style, but not with door-to-door campaigns, instead with texting. And we ran an experiment across about half the country, covering about half the polling stations. And over the course of the 6 days leading up to the election, we sent texts out to about almost 2 million people across the country. We had sort of 3 separate treatment groups. One was just sort of standard encouragement to vote, get out the vote style text messages. A second set of messages was about letting people know that they had to now vote for a different set of positions. In 2010, Kenya changed its constitution, and this resulted in a decentralization in the government, which meant that people had to vote for sort of county-level positions for the first time. And so the second treatment group kind of got texts about, vote for governor because the governor's responsibility are XYZ. And then in the third group, we gave them a bunch of information about what the commission was doing to try and sort of run a free and fair election in Kenya. The Electoral Commission had created a digital voter register with biometrics before the election with the idea of cleaning up the register. And they were trying to really promote a free and fair election. So the third treatment group got a bunch of texts around kind of the things that the commission was trying to do to ensure a free and fair election. And then on election day, a lot of the electronics they had set up, there was the biometric voter register and an electronics results transmission mechanism, where the polling station results would be digitally sent in to Nairobi as a count measure or as a first indication of the count. In a lot of places, these 2 things failed. The electronics failed, the phones weren't necessarily working, passwords weren't clear, et cetera, et cetera. And so the country had to kind of switch to a manual voting process at the last minute on election day. So much as there was a big fanfare about the electronics and the electronic systems, ultimately a lot of people could not use these electronics to vote. Several months after the election, we ended up looking at both the administrative data on elections, because we had covered such a large fraction of the country that we could use administrative data, as well as conducting a survey of about just under 8,000 people in Kenya. We found a couple of things. First, we find that there is voter turnout effects. The texting led to about a 2% increase in voter turnout. Much as this might seem small, it turns out text messages are very cheap. And so cost effectiveness was actually pretty great. The other thing we found out was that the treatment groups that got the texts actually reduced a few measures of trust. So trust in the Electoral Commission, and sort of a loss of trust in whether the election was free and fair. And so the question is why that happened. And I think why it happened was because when we prompted them about the election, they kind of formed priors about how effective and how well organized the Electoral Commission was. And then when on election day, those electronic systems failed, they kind of updated negatively from that process. We also find that, the effects, the reduction in trust are not uniform across the population. The people who allianced with kind of the winning side in the election had no reductions in trust in the commission or in the election. But the people on the losing side was where kind of a lot of these effects dominated. They had lower trust in the commission, and they were less likely to think, the election was free and fair. So what does this mean for the current election? Well, the Electoral Commission is once again promoting its electronics and an electronic voting process and an electronic results transmission mechanism. And I think really making sure these work is crucial. I think the moral of the story is when you promise something, you better deliver, or else it kind of has big effects on your reputation. And so they're currently, as we speak, trialing and testing their electronic systems, and hopefully this time, the systems will work.